Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Michael, it is January 9th, 2026.
Good morning.
We have not been on the air we're not on our podcast for 3 weeks.
You know, and unbelievable as it is, a lot has happened since the last time we were together.
I think we say that. I think we say that at the beginning of each podcast.
Yes, and we mean it like it's new.
Yeah.
And maybe it's getting a little old, but it's
still
true.
Is astounding.
And there's two major categories of things that have happened. I think maybe you'll have some others, but there's the Maduro capture and all the foreign policy stuff that goes with that. Mm-hmm. And then there's increasing number of reports of corruption that I think are just really starting, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah. Well, in addition to that, and those are the two things that are in the news right now.
Yes.
But when we left 3 weeks ago, the Jeffrey Epstein. Now it's who's he? That won't come up anymore because it's now old news.
Oh yeah, getting those records out and all the people grandstanding about releasing all these records.
Yeah, that's now kind of gone.
Yeah.
The other one is,
and this one is because what?
This one is not in the news today, but it will be in the news soon, and that is because it was in the news, and that is the Obamacare COVID era subsidies and the expansion of Obamacare expired. The COVID era expansion expired at the end of December.
Yes.
The budget was the continuing resolution that was passed after the government shutdown to stop the government shutdown. I believe it runs through the end of, I think it's January.
Okay.
So within the next 3 weeks, Congress is going to either have to bring a budget to the floor, a whole budget to the floor for a vote, or they're going to have the continuing resolution issue pop up again.
Right.
So there are other issues that are going to be driving this. And Michael, I'd like to kind of set as our overall theme for the podcast for the next few months is that we're going to be talking about topics and the way things are positioned as we go into the midterm elections.
Yes.
I don't want to try to predict how the midterm elections are going to turn out because I think that's kind of a fool's errand.
Yes.
But I do think that it's worth talking about the issues that we think will be dominant and how we think those issues will be evolving. For example, there's been very good economic news that's come out in the last 48 hours. One on the trade deficit has been cut in half.
I have not seen that.
Yeah, that just came out. Maybe been this morning, and then they've rechanged the growth for either the third or the fourth quarter now to the GDP to above 5%.
Oh, in the past 2 quarters of 2025, they've revised the estimates of how fast the economy grew?
Of one of those 2 quarters.
Okay.
Either the third or the fourth. So we'll be talking about economic growth.
Okay.
And whether or not we think it's going to be strong, whether or not we think inflation is going to be an issue. It will be an issue, but whose side will be able to say that their policies are working?
Right.
And so we'll have lots of different issues. But today, as you point out, the foreign policy issues of Maduro are a big one, and then the fraud that's been uncovered in Minnesota, which we now know also exists in California. We all know exists in the tiny state of Maine. We know that there's some of it in Ohio. And so we'll be talking about what is the nature of this fraud and what drives it,
right.
and why is the left, the Democrat Party, why do they really kind of support the fraudsters? And that's really what's happening. It's not just in Congress or in the individual states. It's even in Congress when there's hearings to try to uncover fraud. It used to be that both parties were against waste, fraud, and abuse. So that term.
Well, one way of looking at this is that there is an increasing level of hostility and conflict between the federal government and the state governments,
yes.
particularly blue state governments. So you've named them. Minnesota's been in the news.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago has been in the news, particularly around ICE. Seattle, California. which others?
Well, New York.
New York City.
New York, yeah. And
New York State.
Yeah. So those would be the big ones. I mean, those would be the biggest ones. Yeah. And so let's kind of just cover different topics that all relate to this type of thing. And the one that I want to kind of start on with, because I was talking with some people in the last few days, and the question is there an incentive for politicians? And we're going to focus on Minnesota because we know more about the Minnesota fraud than we do any of the other states.
Yes.
Is there an incentive to commit fraud in not by the fraudsters, but by the government officials who are supposed to oversee the programs and who have obviously either turned a blind eye or actually assisted the fraudsters commit fraud?
Well, your question was, is there an incentive to do that? I can give you a really long answer, but I also can give you a very short answer, which is yes.
Okay, and what is it?
Well, it's graft.
I know that, but
padding the pockets of the people that support you.
What is? Yeah, but okay, but is there an economic benefit to the state itself for people within the state to commit massive fraud?
Well, it brings in money from Washington into the state.
Yes, that's what's key here. Is that let's kind of break these programs down because it's very interesting. Medicaid, federal government contributes $2 for every dollar a state spends. And by the way, Medicaid is administered at the state level. So the federal government does not oversee Medicaid spending. It just matches it 2-to-1. The same thing is essentially true in any of these other programs like rideshare programs where there are companies set up to help low-income people or people with physical problems to be able to get to appointments, maybe go to the grocery store, go to the drugstore. Apparently there were hundreds of these companies set up in Minnesota. None of them owned a car. And so they were just filing fraudulent reports and getting hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for doing absolutely nothing. But and Minnesota would spend some money on that, but then the federal government would give 2 or 3 times as much. And almost all that money is spent within the states where the fraud is committed. And so it actually benefits the states that commit the fraud because it boosts their economy with federal dollars.
Yes.
That where the gross margin is 100%. So there's no cost. There's no real cost associated with it because it's fraud.
I think you probably have to add that it boosts the economy in a sense, but it's very concentrated benefit to the cheaters.
Well,
there's a lot of people that are not cheating that are getting only secondary and third order effects. Fraudsters are buying things from your store.
Right. And but everybody, I mean, I'm not saying that therefore everybody is in on the fraud, but what I'm saying is at lower levels, everybody benefits from the fraud. But here's the other thing that happens. Because of this massive amount of money that comes in from the federal government, it also makes things more expensive within the states. And so the Democrats run on the issue of affordability, but the states that are committing the greatest amount of fraud have the greatest affordability issues. And I believe that the two are linked.
And so we can say, let's explain why it makes things more expensive. I mean, classic economics says you have more money for the same amount of goods, the prices will rise.
Right. Right.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not just money, it's money that has no cost associated with it in the sense that fraud is where you file reports where you don't do the work that you claim to have done. Mm-hmm. And so that is just pure money. That's like just pure oxygen.
Well, in business, we'd call that 100% margin.
Yes.
You get revenue with no cost.
Right.
And so they have a little cost to file the reports. And so the reality would be they probably have a 90 or 95% gross margin business.
Right. And then the fraudsters get the money and then they turn around and spend it. And so all the people that they spend it with, the restaurants and the retailers and the car dealers and the homes, they buy homes. And they drive the cost of homes up because now you've got people who can afford to buy homes because they were defrauding not just the taxpayers in their own state, which is a modest amount of fraud, but they're defrauding the federal government, which is why the federal deficit is so high, which does affect really negatively all the states that are not participating in the fraud.
Right.
So that's kind of the end, and that issue now is, I believe that the issue of fraud at the state level will be an issue that grows throughout 2026.
And there's a number of layers to this because you have, obviously the social support, like the transport thing that you mentioned. You have daycare that's been written about. You have immigration housing.
And immigrants being put on food stamps.
Immigrant food. All of that are vehicles for this kind of graft.
Right. And when we say immigrants being put on food stamps, the federal law says that illegal immigrants are not eligible for federal programs. And the federal government finances 2/3 of food stamps.
Yeah, we went through this I think maybe the very last one, or at least the last couple of podcasts, where we had sound bites from people that were saying this is illegal, as if that means it doesn't happen.
Right. And then you had Gavin Newsom, who is proud of the fact that he's been breaking the law in California for a number of years.
Yes.
And putting illegal immigrants on all kinds of the programs that are illegal for him to do it, and he says he's proud of it.
Yes.
And so that is the question to me that is a bigger question, because you now have a party. It wasn't that long ago that both parties said they were against waste, fraud, and abuse. That term, waste, fraud, and abuse. Oh, we're against waste, fraud, and abuse. And now what you have is that there's been a great deal of fraud and abuse, and waste, for that matter, uncovered. Now all of a sudden it is the Democrat Party almost in lockstep, claiming that that anyone who opposes what is happening in Minnesota is a racist, and anyone who opposes immigrants getting what are supposed to be illegal benefits is a racist. And so if upholding the law is racist, what's the point of the law? And how does a society operate? And I'm not sure that a society operates long term if you have the two major parties, one who believes in following the rule of law more than the other. I'm not going to, you have a lot of people who they'll say, well, Republicans are bad too. And my response to that is that if 10% of Republicans are bad and 60% of Democrats are bad, both parties are bad.
It's bipartisan bad.
They're bipartisan bad, except one is 6 times more
Bigger
bad,
than the other. Yeah.
more bad than the
Right.
other.
Yeah.
And
this is the way it works in the media when they cover the legislature. If you get one Republican vote for a Democrat initiative, they'll call it bipartisan.
They call it bipartisan. Yeah. And so at any rate, let's touch a little bit. Let's go back to the foreign policy implications and talk a little bit about. I will say this. I opened one of my news feeds that I go to, and I saw the news feed that the United States has just captured Maduro and is bringing it back to the United States, and that was shocking. I was surprised.
You just wake up to that. It really was amazing.
Yes.
And it already happened. It was over.
Yes.
You think, historically, that would be an invasion. It would be weeks. It would be, this happened in like 3 hours.
Yes.
They were in and out in 3 hours.
Yes.
And I read about some of the technology that was available, and it was so layered. You had people on the water. You had helicopters flying 100 feet. You had planes above that surveilling. You had drones in there. And then you had space above that with all the spatial, locators, to coordinate all of this
Right.
stuff. And then you had cyber, that they were using. They shut down the power in the city. They disabled all of their defenses.
Yeah, and they blew them up. Yeah, disabled some and blew up others. But
yeah,
it was an amazing military action. It truly was. From that standpoint, it was amazing.
Didn't they have something? Was it 140 aircraft or 400? I don't remember. It was a very large number.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
I don't remember either, but
Yeah.
but then they got him before he got into a safe room, Maduro and his wife.
Right.
And now they're back in New York in the Southern District, and they're going to be tried. Maduro's the offenses that Maduro that's in the indictment. Noriega got sentenced to 40 years for the same things that Maduro is accused of doing.
So Noriega was in Nicaragua during
Panama.
Panama?
Panama.
Okay, during the
1989.
Bush administration.
Yeah,
the first Bush. Yeah.
1989.
Papa Bush, 41.
And there was a part of that I had forgotten. Noriega had fled from the presidential palace to the Vatican embassy. I had forgotten that part. And then what the Bush administration did was, because they could not invade the Vatican embassy, so they set up all these loudspeakers, very loud speakers, and played rock music.
Or death metal. It was like heavy metal music.
Well,
Wasn't it?
and a lot of Barry Manilow, which
All right.
Barry Manilow
Opposite
in
ends
small
of the
doses
spectrum.
is great.
Yeah.
In large doses, and finally the priests said,
No mas.
no mas. The priest said, Noriega, you got to leave. We're all going. We can't stand it anymore.
Yeah.
And so then he was brought back. He was put on trial. He was sentenced to 40 years, and he died in prison. Maduro's offenses in the indictment include every one of the ones that was Noriega plus other ones.
Yeah.
So Maduro is, my guess is, unless you have a jury that is jury nullification, it'll be very interesting. The case will be, I think it'll be brought here in the next few months, and it'll be a very interesting trial. Having his wife also gives the opportunity for either for her to flip and get off, or for them to be put on trial together, or for him, if he loves her, to agree to let her for the plea bargain. Who knows?
Let's look at one little interesting wrinkle of this. Is it was defended as a law enforcement action to capture somebody to have them face justice in American courts.
Who had been indicted for 5 years and who had a $25 million bounty put on their head by the Biden administration.
Yeah, but there's also clearly a mixture with military and foreign policy kind of considerations. This was not a police force. This was a military action.
Just like Noriega.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is part of what drives Trump's opponents crazy, is that he has all of this power at his disposal. And we can have the legal niceties about was there a proper process done? Was there a grand jury? Was there an indictment?
And there was.
And there was.
All of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But their opposition is that he has too much power to do this stuff without congressional authority, congressional prior authorization. Even Rand Paul and some others are resisting having that much power.
Rand Paul always does.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that doesn't mean he is like a stopped clock.
Well, what I'm trying to point out is the conflict between process and outcome. You can quibble over process, but to me the outcome is so clear. What was going on is so clear, that the guy had stolen the election, that he had turned a modern economy into a narco state.
Well,
he
not
was
just a narco
colluding
state.
with the Chinese and the Russians.
Yes.
Giving them a base of operations in our hemisphere and enabling Colombia and other drug operations regionally.
Right. Well, he had also stolen the assets of Chevron Oil. Chevron sued him in U.S. courts. The courts in the U.S. found in favor of Chevron and said that Maduro stole $30 billion worth of value.
Yeah.
And so when you add all this together, Maduro was a criminal. And the Democrats said he's a criminal, but then didn't want anything done about it. And that's what's the difference between Trump and Biden and probably a lot of other presidents. Although George H.W. Bush did go, and he used exactly the same tactics to capture Noriega, except Noriega escaped to the Vatican, the Vatican embassy.
When we're talking about the corruption, we can explain why it happened, because people's political supporters benefit from it. So you turn your eyes and allow this to happen so that your supporters get rich and get fat, and some of that money comes back to you politically. We've looked at a similar pattern in government unions who take a lot of their money and then support the left to keep them employed, right? So there's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
What is the feedback loop in foreign policy? Because, clearly Maduro was enabling Iran, China, and Russia, our three principal enemies.
And the other narco states.
And yes.
And the other Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua.
Yeah. Who's benefiting from that on our side? Why would Biden turn his head from that and allow it to continue?
Well, in the case of Biden, I think we can admit that Biden was mentally not all there, and so his administration, frankly, was being run by others.
But why
and
would
they
didn't
didn't see invading? Do you think for a second that the Biden administration could have pulled off either the bombing run on Iranian nuclear facilities or this? Do you think that Biden's people could have pulled that off? I don't think so. I really don't think that Biden's people could have pulled off either one of them.
It's an interesting question because it's the same military, or maybe it's not the same military from one month to the next.
Look at when they left Afghanistan. Look what a mess that was.
Yeah.
And that was the same military, if you want to call it that. It was the same institution.
So this raises a question of competence.
Yes.
But I'm asking a question about motivation and incentive. Why would not even the Biden administration say we can't have this, the results are too obviously adverse, and we're going to stop it? And he didn't. He didn't do it with immigration. You can explain that because you're trying to get new voters for the left and people dependent on government who then look to the pro-government party to
But I think they're
stay
related.
in power.
I think they're related.
How are they related?
Well, Biden actually flew people from Venezuela into the U.S., illegal immigrants, flew them from Venezuela in. He allowed Maduro to empty his jails, allowed Maduro to empty his insane asylums. So you could even argue, you could make an argument that Biden put the $25 million bounty as just show. But he was actually in league with him. You could make that argument because the number of people who have left Venezuela, it's like 8 or 9 million people.
Right.
In the last 5 years.
And a meaningful proportion of those have come to the United States.
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, what was so interesting was when Trump captured Maduro and brought him back, the Venezuelan population that had come from Venezuela to the U.S., they were ecstatic for the most part.
Yeah, because they want to go back.
They want to go
That's
back,
their
they recognized Maduro for the true thug that he was. But it's very interesting how the Democrats, the joke I made before the thing is Maduro is the first illegal immigrant that Democrats want sent home. and
I love it.
But it's true. And to me it's not just the issue, it's what it says. And that's what makes me so worried.
So, in the months leading up to this, we had a number of attacks on drug runners, what Trump claimed were drug runners. You had the left saying, no, those are just fishermen. We don't have any kind of legal process. We're just blowing fishermen out of the water.
Yeah.
What factual basis do they have to say that? And again, back to process versus outcome. When it seems pretty clear that these people have boats full of drugs. There's drugs floating in the water after they blow it up.
Right.
As far as I can tell, I wasn't there and I didn't pick up
the videos show cocaine.
They show bags
packed in kilos and bags.
Yeah.
On the boat, and they generally have 2 or 3 people running these speed boats.
Right.
These fast boats that are they got four big engines in the back, and they're just zooming across the water.
Well, they look like speed boats. They're not dragging a hook.
No, they're moving very fast.
Yeah,
and they're drug runners. That's what they are.
Right.
And then the other thing that Trump started to do more recently is he started taking control of oil tankers, and then he also blew up a lot of the facilities of the port in Nicaragua, where in Venezuela, where the oil was being loaded.
Yeah.
And so.
Did you see the one that they captured that a Russian submarine was actually escorting?
Did they capture the submarine?
They captured the boat.
Yeah, well, what's
they boarded the boat? There were the Russians there trying to protect that boat and get it back to Russia.
Exactly. How do you think Russia was supposedly protecting that boat with a submarine? Were they going to shoot a torpedo into a boat? And they certainly couldn't do anything against a helicopter because submarines don't do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm not an expert on it. They do have missiles on them. They can launch, but they're generally intercontinental and stuff like that. So I don't think they're well equipped to shoot at helicopters.
Right.
But the point was they were trying to protect it and get it, and they did. They had zero effect. We just boarded it and took it over.
Yeah, and so what Trump is essentially saying is that the Monroe Doctrine. People now call it the Donroe Doctrine, but the Monroe Doctrine means something, and it means something for a reason. And so that's what he's doing.
So the Monroe Doctrine was to insist on American influence in our hemisphere. And not allow influence from other parts of the world in our hemisphere.
Yes.
And that clearly was being violated in the case of...
and to have adversaries.
Yeah. It was what was going on in Cuba during Kennedy administration. You had people trying to get missile bases and threats to America within shooting distance of the United States.
Right. And so at any rate, so Maduro is now here. What's interesting is that the pollster from CNN, who I think really does a good job on his polls, he pointed out that only 21% of the public wanted Maduro to be captured and brought back to justice before the invasion. And then after they got him and brought him back, that 21% jumped to 38%.
These are U.S.
U.S.
respondents?
Yeah. And so Trump did not do it because his political base wanted him to do it. He did it. I believe Trump did it because he thought it was good for the United States.
Yeah.
I think his America First agenda is he has some very, very strong feelings about what that means. And he is acting on his very, very strong beliefs. And that is, and that gets back what we've talked about in other podcasts is our system. We have elections so the voters can indicate what they want. And that's where we talk about why it's important that candidates be very honest with the voters on what they intend to do if elected so that the voters can
have a choice.
Yes. And then hopefully, as far as democracy and the way our system works is that if people do what they promise to do, then voters are getting what they ask for. And in Trump's case, I think he's been the most loyal to his campaign promises of any president in my memory. And that goes back, unfortunately for me, many years.
Well, fortunately for you.
Ripe
old age, that's very fortunate.
That's right. You're exactly right. And so
we have overlooked something here. It just occurred to me. There's a third major thing going on, and that is riots in Iran. Last time we were here, we talked about Iran maybe running out of water.
Yes.
Because they have so underinvested in their water infrastructure, there was concern that the taps might not run in Iran.
And that is I check that once a week.
Okay.
It's getting worse.
You turn on your tap, or do you go there and turn on their tap? What is it you check?
I check the news.
You check the news?
I check the news.
And somebody else is checking the taps, and what do they say?
They say that they actually, what they do is they measure the amount of water in the reservoirs that service Tehran.
Okay.
And those reservoirs are getting lower and lower. And if they don't get a substantial amount of rain, which would be very abnormal for that area, for that area of the world, period.
Yeah.
That they will be running out of water sometime in the next 90 days in Tehran. I mean, literally no drinking water.
Yeah.
And so you also have the riots, and then you read different things in the news that the Ayatollah,
riots are not specifically about that, as I understand. It's about inflation and repression.
Right. And but when you don't have water,
it'll get worse.
It'll get worse.
People get more desperate.
Yes, and what I've heard is that the Ayatollah and the clerics have have a plan B of moving to Moscow, where Assad is from Syria, and so we'll just have to watch Iran. But that is a big deal.
Yeah,
and I think that Trump is putting a great deal of pressure on Iran, and so we'll see how that plays out. Now, so that's the foreign policy issues. Let's talk a little bit about New York and the election in New York. Mamdani was elected before we left, but he was sworn in while we were on a break, and so he gives a speech, his inauguration speech. And what was that line in his speech that is so telling about? We're going to replace rugged individualism with
the coldness of individualism with the warmth of collectivism.
Yeah.
How warm it is.
Yeah. And that is such a kind way of saying that we're going to be thugs.
Yeah.
We're going to force people to do what we want them to do, but we'll do it for nice reasons.
Yeah.
And then he appointed as his chief advisor for housing a woman who is a self-described communist, and who has said that her goal is to eliminate the value of housing, so that houses
reduce the value of
to zero.
Zero?
Yes, she wants to reduce the value of housing to zero, meaning the government owns it and allows you to live in it. And she was apparently a reporter found her on the street and said, well, your mother lives in a $1.6 million home, ironically enough, here in Nashville, Tennessee.
About 2 miles from where we sit right now.
Yes, she's a professor at Vanderbilt, and she lives in a very nice house. The values that I've seen in the reports are $1.6 million.
Right.
That's a nice house in Nashville, not a mansion, but a nice house. But when she was asked about whether or not her mother's house should be taken away from her, rather than answering the question, she started crying and then ran away. That's the communist advisor's response to being asked a very legitimate question.
This is the people who have the ear of the mayor of New York.
Yeah. And then
I
the
have
other
to tell you, let me just interrupt you a second. When you talked about shifting from international to local, this story flashed in my mind. When I lived in Boston, when I was in graduate school, Bushes were in office, the first Bush. And somebody asked his Baker, James Baker, his like right-hand man, big lawyer from Texas, one time, if he'd ever been to a communist country. And he said, no, but I've been to Massachusetts. And the people on the news that reported that had these enormous scowls because they think of themselves as the birth, the cradle of the American Revolution. Yes. Shot her around the world and conquered green and all of that. And it is, but New Yorkers think of themselves as the essence of Americanism. The energy and the focus of American commercial activity is in New York. And so they think of it as prototypically American. From our point of view in the South, the way they govern themselves is highly un-American, particularly right now.
Right. I agree on both of those points in terms Massachusetts is moving farther to the left.
Yeah.
New York has moved way to the left. And then there's something going on in California that I want to touch on in just
in Chicago.
In particular, this one thing in California that I want to touch on. But the other thing that Mamdani did was he signed 3 executive orders on day one that stripped the Jewish community of the laws that protect them against anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, and it was very intentional. So he is now that he is in, the things he is doing is very, very intentional. And it's going to be interesting because
and transparent.
Well, yes. Well, not just I'm saying it's
clear what he's doing.
He's clear what he's doing, and he's doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
And but the free buses, he's promised free buses, and that requires Albany to allow that. He has
the state capital has to go.
State capital has to because there's $600 million that the revenue that is collected through the way the bus system operates right now. If it's free, that $600 million disappears. It has to be replaced by taxes. New York, and I don't remember exactly. I think New York City itself owns over 100,000 housing units. So you get back to the housing czar, who says that property values need to be reduced to zero. In her mind, those 100,000 units are worth zero because the government owns them and decides who gets to live in them. And so they now want to apply the same standards. And what Mamdani has said is that if a tenant complains to our department and the landlord does not fix the problem, then we will, and then this is where he's a little vague, we will side, it's more or less, we will side with the tenant until the landlord does what the landlord should do. And that's what the landlord should do as determined by Mamdani's people.
Yeah.
And so what I could see happening is some activists in New York making demands that are so expensive for landlords that landlords go broke if they do what the tenants demand.
This is already happening before, even under the laws that are there. There are landlords that have abandoned their buildings.
Yes.
Because they can't get enough out of them to justify putting money into them.
Well, but they've been able to do that and abandon them. They're not taken over by the city. They're just empty.
Yes.
They're 26,000 empty units.
Yes.
But they're still owned by a landlord.
Right.
The question is whether or not Mamdani says we're just going to take them. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what Mamdani does on the housing issue.
Well, that's unconstitutional. I mean, there's an explicit part of the U.S. Constitution that prevents takings. You've got to have back to procedure and ends. You've got to have a very specific procedure to take somebody's property.
Yeah, that's as long as the courts agree with what you just said, then the Constitution would prohibit him from doing that. Yeah. But if we ever get to the point where judges say, well, we have a living Constitution, and because we have a living Constitution, property rights are no longer constitutionally allowed.
Yeah.
All it takes is judges.
Yes.
So
it could be state judges, it could be federal judges, and this raises again one of the questions I started the podcast with: what's the nature of the conflict to come?
Right.
Is the federal government going to go there and say, no, you will not take property that's not yours?
Right. Well, and this Supreme Court would say that if you're going to take property, you have to pay fair value.
Yes.
To the property owner.
Yes. Because
that's what the Constitution requires.
Right.
So this Supreme Court would say if you want to take it through eminent domain, you can, but you have to pay for it.
Right.
And so that then raises the question of where does the money come from? So we're going to watch New York, Mike, this year, and we'll watch New York and see what happens, and then we'll try to talk about what the implications of that are for the 2026 election. Now, I want to switch gears over to California because the government employee unions in California have drafted a ballot initiative, because in California you can pass a law either through the legislature or you can go through all the trouble, which there is a lot of work involved in putting a ballot initiative on the ballot. If the voters vote in favor of the ballot initiative, it becomes
law.
First,
it's a petition, right? First, you have to sign a lot of people have to sign a petition.
Right.
And in this case, they'll get that because the unions have a lot of followers that'll sign that petition.
Well, we think they
so.
will.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but they're working on that now. And this petition or ballot initiative, whatever you want to call it, what it says is that if you have more than $1 billion of net worth and you live in California, if the ballot initiative passes in November, then for one time, you have to pay an amount equal to 5% of your net worth to the state of California, effective on whatever your net worth was as of December 31st, 2025. So we've passed that date. So if your net worth was $10 billion, then you'll have to pay $450 million in taxes, and you have 5 years to pay it.
So I saw this week that Larry Page, is that his name, Page?
Yes, Page is, yeah.
And Larry Ellison of Oracle, both Larrys.
The Larrys.
Have made legal adjustments in their, residency or ownership of their companies, whatever their lawyers had them do to remove them from that gunshot, right? And so in their case, they're worth like $120 billion.
Yes.
And so 5% of that is like $9 billion.
Well, it's $5 billion is what that is, but they'd have to sell about
this is interesting. Yeah,
they'd have to sell about $9 billion of assets because they don't have cash. People who have billions of dollars, they have assets. Generally, it's stocks, and the stocks have great appreciation.
Well, then both of those two we mentioned, they've been in those companies for a long time. They got the stock as founders
at less than a penny.
Yeah,
and so virtually 100% of their stock ownership is capital gain. If you sell a stock and you live in California, you have to pay the state of California a capital gains tax of 13.3%. The federal tax on capital gains is 20% plus the 3.9% Obamacare capital gains tax.
So it's a total of 37 or 36.9?
Well, you have 24 plus 13.
Well, that's 37.
37, yeah, 37%. And so you have to sell enough stock to be able to reduce the amount you sold by 37%. So you'd have to sell about $9 billion of stock, pay $4 billion to the state for capital gains and to the federal government for capital gains to have the $5 billion remaining to pay the state on the wealth tax.
Right.
and there are 200 billionaires in California, and they estimate that they will collect $100 billion from those 200 people. So they're assuming that those 200 people will sit still.
Two of them already have not.
And allow themselves to be taxed. Now, if I'm worth $2 billion on January 1st in a privately owned company that is not yet public but venture backed, I don't have any way of liquidating those shares. What happens if the value of that company goes down?
So let's just clarify for anyone listener who's not familiar with this.
This is very important.
Early stage companies generally are illiquid, meaning they're not posted on public exchanges.
Right.
They're not listed on any stock exchange where you can call your broker today and sell it and get your money in 3 days.
So let me get into a little bit more detail.
Okay.
Let's say that you have a high tech company.
Right.
And let's say that it raises $1 billion from private equity firms.
Right.
This is very normal.
Yes.
And the private equity firm says, I want 5% of that company for $1 billion.
So it's worth 20 times that much.
So the whole company, what is called the enterprise value, is $20 million. Okay, 20 billion. And let's say the founder still owns 20%. So the founder, based on the last private round, is worth $4 billion. Their stock is worth $4 billion.
But he may have a few $1,000s in his check account or a few tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. He might even have $1 million.
But nowhere near that amount of money.
Nowhere near the money to pay in taxes. But the other thing is, if the company between January 1st and the November referendum, the election, if the value of the company goes down, he still has to pay taxes based on a valuation
in the past.
In the past.
Yeah.
So he may actually become a tax cheat, not of his own making. This is why this tax is such a bad tax in general, but incredibly risky if you live in California and you're a wealthy person. So of these 200 people, some percentage of those will move between now and the time the law might be passed, because if it is passed, the moment it's passed, you owe the tax. So you can't move afterwards and avoid the tax. They'll just chase you.
Right.
And say you got 5 years to pay it. You were here when it passed.
Well, they've done that for years. I know people who've moved out of, or heard of people that moved out of California and live elsewhere, and the government of California is still chasing them.
Yeah.
To pay what California claims they owe from years ago.
Right. But in this case, there's a very small number.
Yeah.
And California would really chase them.
They will find them, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is going to be very interesting to see, because of those 200 billionaires, they already pay a lot of money to the state of California in regular taxes under the current tax system of California.
Yeah, and if they leave, then that's gone.
Yeah, and so if they leave, then California loses that revenue. Yeah. In addition to they don't get the revenue that they're projecting. And a lot of those people may end up eventually just taking the whole business with them, which means that all of the high-paid executives now are also leaving California.
Well, Oracle has already moved to Austin, and it's going to be moving to Nashville.
Nashville, yeah.
And Ken Griffith has already left Chicago to move to Florida for very similar reasons.
Exactly. And so we will watch what we're saying here, Michael, for the audience is we're going to watch individual states and individual cities for what they do, and we're going to be discussing what it means not just for the 2026 election, but what it means for the country as a whole, because at the end of the day, one side of this is going to win and one side of this is going to lose. And now the divide is not a narrow divide; it's a huge divide.
Right.
And we talk a lot about in our previous podcast. We talk a lot about we can learn from the lessons of history, and we know that the Roman Empire ultimately collapsed when the inflation got so bad because they debased their currency, especially in the last 20 years of the Roman Empire. And by the way, the Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years, so that's quite an achievement.
It is.
But when the Roman Empire collapsed, the whole area that was the Roman Empire, it went into a many centuries of decline, many centuries of decline. And so the lessons of history are valuable only if you learn them and then apply them.
There's one other theme I'd like to just touch on. In the last couple of months, we've talked a lot about federalism and what it means. You know, before the Civil War, the United States was a confederation or a kind of league of states, each of which was sovereign. They were kind of connected together, but not real strongly. And after the Civil War, it became more of a unitary, national, transcontinental entity, with more and more power over the time since the Civil War concentrated in Washington. I happen to think that the original Federalist pattern is brilliant in that you get to see the results. It's like a laboratory. Let's see how somebody does with the policies that are followed in California and Chicago and New York, and see how people do with the policies that are followed in Florida. And to me, the results are fairly clear in the moving patterns.
Right, but it's not just that. The other thing that the Constitution did when they replaced the Articles of Confederation is the federal government, the national government, was the only government entity that could coin money.
Right,
and as long as it was small, as long as spending was small, then it couldn't be abused because it was small. And if a state wanted to spend money on some social program, the voters of that state had to vote to tax themselves. But after FDR, and so I'm going to push back just a tad on, the Civil War is a demarcation line for the idea of unity. But even when 60 years after the Civil War, when Calvin Coolidge was president, the total federal spending in 2023 was only $2.3 billion, and 2/3 of that was defense. So we were only spending $700 million. We're spending now, is it 1,000 or 10,000 times? It'd be
I can't do the math.
It'd be 10,000 times.
Okay,
it's now 10,000 times that much domestically, and so the genie is out of the bottle.
Well, part of what I hear you saying is that the laboratory effect of different states is highly qualified because we're all subject to the value of the currency.
Right.
We use the same currency, and if it's debased, you get hurt in a red state just like you do in a blue state.
Right, and the incentives to defraud the federal government are so large. And by the way, the solution to that one issue is to block grant social money to the states. Say this is how, and so every state gets X amount of money for the total number of citizens that it has in that state. Say that's what you get to spend money from the federal government on your social programs. If you want to spend any more than that on social programs, tax your own citizens. It's up to you.
Right.
And if you administer that money wisely, your lower income people should be properly taken care of.
Yeah.
If you abuse it and give it to a bunch of special interests, then your lower income people are going to suffer mightily. But it's your fault, not somebody else's fault.
It's kind of interesting that it's a parallel with retirement accounts, where companies used to have defined benefit. They were on the hook for whatever it took to pay for a certain standard of benefits till you die.
Right.
Right. And that got so expensive that they changed and said, we're just going to give you a defined contribution. We'll give you X thousands a year. You do with it what you want. You match it with what you want. The way you end up is your business.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go bankrupt, it's yours. It's not our problem. And there's a similar thing going on at the government. What you're suggesting is they should change their spending to the states to be block grants, to be defined contributions, not defined benefits.
Well said. Yeah, that's a great analogy. That's a great one. And I don't, and Democrats will fight that, but that can be done through reconciliation. That could be done in a reconciliation bill. But what's required to do a reconciliation bill, one party has to control the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
So the standards of voting are different, and the percentages you have to have in each house, and,
yes.
and the rules around what gets brought how
yeah.
changes, and it's easier to pass under
yeah.
reconciliation is what you're saying.
Yeah. And so, Michael, just to kind of sum up this week, and then these will be the topics or similar topics going forward. We've talked about foreign policy. Mm-hmm. We haven't really talked much about health care, so I want to do that next week as to what it looks like, what things might be taking shape on terms of health care reform, because that's the key to budget, deficit, everything else. And then the budget, and then the economy overall. What you're going to have in this quarter is that you will have the when the big beautiful bill was passed back in April or May, it cut taxes on tips, taxes on overtime, and taxes on Social Security, but it didn't change the withholding in 2025. And so the tax refunds in the first quarter of 2026 will be much larger than normal. And so I think that will have a boon to the middle class and lower middle class who work for tips, work for overtime, and then people on Social Security who will get a refund on the taxes that were withheld last year. Then the other thing is then effective January 1st, 26, the withholding will drop to match the new tax rates.
So there'll be more money in their
So
pocket.
there'll be more money, and that'll go all through 26. The next thing that'll happen in 26 is that the big, beautiful bill gave businesses the ability to depreciate 100% of the amount of money they spend on capital goods in 26,
So those
27.
should be buying more equipment.
So they'll be buying more equipment in 26
It'll stimulate the
and
economy.
27. That will stimulate the economy. And so I anticipate, I'm going to predict here, I anticipate a very strong economy in 26 leading into the midterms. And we have to remember that not a single Democrat voted for the big, beautiful bill.
Right.
It passed on party lines. So if the economy is doing well in 26, then there's nothing about what the Democrats have done where they ought to be able to legitimately claim credit for it. So it'll be, and this affordability issue will be tied into all of that.
Right, and it'll change its meaning. What's
Yeah.
affordable and what are the causes of things that are not affordable,
Yeah.
et cetera. One thing just occurs to me that I want to lay down a seed for future discussion. We talked about international affairs. We talked about Venezuela and Iran. There's also important things going on with Europe and their own management of their immigration.
Love it.
And their connection to the history of Western civilization and the rule of law and the other things that determine how we live in the West. It's being challenged.
Yes.
And it may be compromised in
Yes.
Europe. The other thing is that author that I read recently said the whole Belt and Road Initiative from China is now threatened because they've loaned tens of billions of dollars to try to get beachheads all around the world. To
Hundreds of billions.
trillions. I don't know the number.
it's-
It's enormous. But look at Venezuela. Now it's not going to be able to pay that back.
Right.
Okay? And if this happens in a number of different places, then what happens to China's might and its geopolitical influence if they've got a bunch of dead loans out there?
Right.
That's a big deal.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Well, Michael, good to have you back. I hope you had a great I know you had a happy New Year and a wonderful Christmas, as did I.
Yes.
So we'll be back next Friday, and our theme will be topics and how they relate to our long-term prosperity and in particular the 2026 midterms.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
See you next week.
Yep.